Hello! In this lecture we'll create our first ASP.NET Web API application. The application will be called Books and Authors and will be used to manage a list of books and authors. In our application, we'll perform some basic operations such as displaying the list of books, viewing individual items, modifying their content, and deleting them. So let's get started. In Visual Studio, we create a new project. So, File, New, Project. We have to choose the ASP.NET Core Web API template from the list of available templates. We got it here, we select it, and then we press Next. Now we enter the name of our application, which is Books and Authors. And we press Next. On the next screen, we'll leave the default values for all project parameters and click Create. Visual Studio has created an ASP.NET Web API project. We're gonna close this window. We start by looking into the Controllers folder. In this folder, we have special classes called Controllers. Currently, we got here one example class created by the Visual Studio template. This class is called Weather Forecast Controller. We'll use this example class to create our own. But first, we need to change its name to Books Controller. So, Visual Studio asks us whether we would like to make a global renaming for Weather Forecast Controller. We don't want it, so we press No. Now we're gonna stop for a while and talk a little bit more about controllers and endpoints. An action is nothing more than a public method that will be called from the front end of our application. In our Books controller, we're gonna create 6 endpoints: getAll, getItem, deleteItem, addItem, updateItem, and getItemByTitle. So now we know what actions or endpoints are. The names actions and endpoints can be used exchangeably. So, before we start creating endpoints or actions for our Books controller, we're gonna create a simple data structure to work with. In the real-world applications, data is typically stored in databases. However, for the purposes of this lecture, we'll create an in-memory data structure. The structure will store information about books and will be a list of books. We're gonna begin by defining the shape of an entry in our list. Okay, let's go to Weather Forecast Controller and change its name to Books Controller. Books. Now let's delete the current contents of this class. Okay, done. Now we're gonna define the shape of an entry in our list of books. To do this, in our controller, we create a class representing a single item of our list of books. We're gonna call this class Book. Our class will have a very simple structure consisting of an integer property ID to store the book's identifier and a string property title to store the book's title. Let me paste here this cast class. So we have here two properties, an ID and a title. Okay. Now that we have the structure of an individual book entry defined, we can create the list. Let me paste here a list which contains 3 books. Book number 1, book number 2, and the book number 3. Now that we have all 3 items, the data is prepared, we can move on to the methods. We're gonna create our first method, the action, which returns a list of books. As we have already mentioned, every controller consists of one or more endpoints. These are entry points to the controller that allow front-end queries to get a specific result. For example, the task of the getAll endpoint is to deliver the list of books from the backend to the frontend. Let's create this endpoint in our controller. We're gonna name it getAll. Our endpoint is gonna take no parameters and it's gonna return a list of books. List of books. Okay, as we've mentioned, each endpoint has to be a public method, so we're gonna put public keyword here. Okay, now it's time for the body of our endpoint. It's gonna be very simple. Our endpoint should return our list of books, so return books. And that's it. We've got our endpoint done. That's one more thing that we have to do. Our endpoint should respond to HTTP GET verb. To achieve this, we have to mark our getAll method with the HTTP GET attribute. So we add the HTTP GET attribute above the method's name. So here. HTTP GET. Okay, let's summarize that. We now have a controller called BooksController with one method, for now, responding to the HTTP GET verb. This method, called getAll, returns the list of books to the frontend. So let's check how this works in practice. We're gonna launch our application. To do this, we click the green triangle here. As the application starts, we can see Swagger in our browser. Swagger is a tool used for testing and debugging backend applications. It's like a front-end simulator. Backend developers who may not yet have a front-end application or prefer not to use it yet, have various tools to assist in testing and debugging backend applications. One of these tools is Swagger. Swagger runs in the browser and displays all controllers and their endpoints. We can see it here. There's our controller, the BooksController, with one endpoint. This endpoint triggers our getAll action. It's an endpoint responding to the HTTP GET verb. After triggering this endpoint, the getAll method will run on the backend and will return the list of all books to the frontend. We're gonna click Get then, try it out, and execute. Let's look at the result. It works as we expected. It has returned 3 items from the backend. Title 1, Title 2 and Title 3. 3 books. Everything works. Okay, so putting it all together. So far we have created a controller called BooksController that currently contains one method, also called an action, which corresponds to an endpoint for getting all items of list books. This method is called getAll, and it returns the list of books. We have defined the book class, which specifies the shape of each entry in the list of books, and the list itself. Our endpoint, getAll endpoint, responds to the HTTP GET verb. And after being triggered, it provides the entire list of books. We currently have 3 items in the list, and all 3 items were displayed in the response body field in Swagger. So everything worked. In this lecture, we will create the second endpoint of our controller, which will be used to remove books from the list of books. We're gonna name it delete item. This endpoint will be responding to the HTTP delete request. We're gonna start with putting the HTTP delete attribute. HTTP delete. Now we're gonna define the action. Every action is a public method, so we start by using the public keyword. Then it returns a special type of value, the action result. Action result type is used to return responses from the backend to the frontend. It includes such information as the response code, response body, and the other details. So our method returns the action result type. We're gonna name it remove item. Now it's time for the arguments. We need to specify which item in the list we want to remove. This will be done by providing the identifier ID of the record to be deleted. Therefore, the argument will be an integer and will be called ID. So, integer ID. Okay, so the next question is how our endpoint gets the value for ID. There are different methods for passing parameters from the frontend to the backend. One of these methods relies on downloading parameter from the query. We won't go into the details of it now, but we'll cover that in the future. For now, we just use the fromQuery method. A parameter passed this way is inserted into the HTTP request's URL after the address and, if necessary, the port number. To indicate that our parameter for the remove item method should be taken from query, we need to mark this parameter with the proper fromQuery attribute. As I've mentioned, it will be covered in more detail in later lectures. So we're gonna use fromQuery attribute right here. Okay. So far we have a declaration of our function. Now let's move on to the body of this function. So, curly brackets. We're gonna start by checking and, if necessary, retrieving the specified item into a dedicated variable. We need to attempt to get the item with the specified ID and store it in a variable. Let's define a variable called item and let's try to assign it the element with a specified ID from our list. To do this, we're gonna use the first or default method. So var item, our list of books, and now we're gonna use first or default method. So this method attempts to find an element in the collection, in our case in the list, that meets the specified condition. So let's give here our condition. So we are looking for the element which ID is equal to ID given as a parameter to our method. If we find such element, we're gonna return it, otherwise we're gonna return null. So we can face here one of two situations. Either the item with given ID exists and can be retrieved and assigned to the item variable, or it does not exist. In the second case, the return value from first or default will be null. In the next step, we're gonna check if the item is null. If it is, this means that an element with the specified ID doesn't exist in our list. In such case, we have to return a not found response to the frontend. The not found response means that the request sent from the frontend is invalid, as no element with given ID exists in the list. To achieve this, we use the return statement to return not found response, which implies code 400 to the frontend. If item equals null, we're gonna return not found. Return not found. Okay. However, if the element with given ID does exist, we can remove it. So we're gonna use the remove method to remove the identified element from the books list. So books, remove our item. Okay. After removing the element from the list, we're gonna use the return statement to send the OK response, which implies code 200 to the frontend. This indicates that the operation was successful. So we enter here, return OK. Now that we have our endpoint ready, let's test it and check if the application works as expected. So let's launch our application. The application has started and we can see that a new endpoint has appeared in the Books controller. This new endpoint is related to the HTTP delete method corresponding to the remove item action. Let's test its functionality. But before doing that, let's get sure that there are currently 3 items in the list. We're gonna use the get endpoint. We press get, try it out and execute. As a result, we get a list of 3 books. Next, we're gonna use the delete endpoint to attempt to delete some item from the list. We go to the delete endpoint. This endpoint requires an ID parameter for the book to be removed. For example, we might wish to delete the book with ID equal to 3. So try it out. We enter here 3 and execute. After executing the endpoint, we receive the 200 response code indicating that the operation was successful. Now let's check if the item has been removed. To do it, we're gonna use the get endpoint again to retrieve the list, the current status of our list. So let's turn back to get and let's execute this endpoint. Everything works as expected. The book with ID equal to 3 has been removed from the list, which means that our delete endpoint works correctly. Let's do one more test and attempt to use the delete endpoint to remove an item that doesn't exist in the list. For example, let's enter 100 as the ID parameter, knowing that it isn't related to any book in our list. Let's turn back to delete endpoint. Let's enter here ID equal to 100. And let's execute our endpoint. We've received 404 response, indicating not found. This behavior is expected as there's no book in the list with ID equal to 100. Of course, nothing has been removed. We can verify it by executing the get endpoint again. So let's turn back to get endpoint and let's execute it once again. The list, of course, has not been changed. There are still 2 items in this list. Our application behaves as expected, confirming that our delete endpoint is working correctly. Our books controller currently has 2 actions, which are 2 public methods representing its endpoints. It has getAll action for displaying the full list of books, and delete item for removing items from the list. Now it's time for the third action, which is the action for adding items to the list. This action will be associated with the HTTP POST verb used to send data from the frontend to the backend. So we're gonna use the HTTP POST attribute to associate our action with the POST verb, and we're gonna create an action, which is a public method in the controller. Let's switch to Visual Studio. So first, HTTP POST attribute. Okay. We're gonna create a new method, add item. This method should return action result type. And of course, it's gonna be a public method. Our method is gonna accept only one parameter, which is the value of the item to be added. So, parameters. It of course is gonna be type book. And the name of the parameter new book. We're gonna retrieve this parameter from the body of the HTTP request. So we're gonna use from body attribute. from body. Each HTTP request has so-called body. Body is a place where, among others, HTTP request parameters can be located. So we're gonna fetch the value related to parameters of our new book just from request body. But don't worry about these issues right now, since we're gonna talk about them a little bit later in one of the following lectures. Now that we have the method signature ready, it's time to implement the method's body. For our method, the logic's gonna be very simple. We just want to add an item to the list of books. So we will use the add method on this list and pass the new item, new book, as its parameter. So first curly brackets, our list, books, and the method add, and we're gonna add our new book. After performing this operation, we return a success message by calling the create method, which will set appropriate status code to the frontend, indicating that the operation was successful. So return created. And that's it. We've got our method ready. So now we can run our application. We can see in Swagger that the third endpoint appeared there and is associated with the post verb, which is used to send new data from the frontend to the backend. Post. We're gonna execute this method. So, try it out. Now we're gonna modify the request body of our HTTP request and set the ID, and title properties. For example, we can set the ID to 4 and the title to title 4. Now we can run our operation by pressing execute. And we can see 204 status code, which corresponds to created. A new item in our list of books has been created. Now let's check if the new item actually appears in our list of books. To do this, we'll return to the get endpoint and execute it. Get, try it out, and execute. Now we can see 4 items in our list, including the recently added item with the ID 4 and the title 4. Here we got it. Everything works as expected. In this lecture, we're gonna focus on updating items in the list. Our controller, Books controller, currently has 3 actions: get all, delete item, and add item. We're gonna create a 4th action for updating items in the list, specifically to update a single item. Okay, so now let's switch to Visual Studio to create update item endpoint. We're gonna start with putting the HTTP put attribute. Put verb is used to update data. HTTP put attribute will be associated with the method we're gonna create. So, HTTP put attribute. We're gonna name our action update item. Update item. It's gonna be public as the other actions. And it's gonna return the action result type. Then we need to put an integer ID as a parameter, as it refers to the specific ID in the list of books. This parameter will be taken from query, so we're gonna put from query attribute in front of it. So, from query, integer ID, and apart from the ID parameter, which indicates what we want to update, it's necessary to specify a new value. We're gonna name this parameter update item. And it's gonna carry an updated value of given book. The updated value will be an object of the book type, since the items in the list of books are objects of the book type too. So we're gonna use a book object for the update. Another aspect is the source from which the parameter will be obtained. We're gonna use the FromBody attribute to specify that the parameter will be passed in the body of the HTTP request. So, from body. We'll discuss the sources for controller actions parameter in detail in a later lecture. For now, assume that the value of the update item parameter will be retrieved from body. From body of our HTTP request. Now we have the signature of the fourth action in our controller. The update item will be used to update a single item in the list. This action is going to return action result type, which will give the result of the operation, such as OK, but request or not found, or anything else we can put here. As we can see, the update item action takes two parameters. The ID, which indicates the item we want to update. This is an integer parameter, and its value is extracted using the FromQuery attribute. And the update item parameter, which carries the updated value of an item. Since the list item is a book object, the updated item parameter is also of type book. Let's make a little correction here. Updated item. Now it's okay. And let's remove this square bracket which is not needed here. We have our action declared. Let's define its body. We're gonna begin by checking whether the item with the specified ID exists in our list. We're gonna use a variable called index to store the index of the item if it exists. We're gonna check for the index by calling the findIndex method on our list of books. First, color brackets. For index our list of books, and now we use the findIndex method and provide our ID as a parameter in shape of lambda expression, of course. Okay. So in this line of code, we attempt to find index of an item which ID is equal to the ID provided as a parameter to our method. And if we find one, we're gonna get it. Otherwise, the index variable will be assigned -1. So if such an element exists, the find index will return its index. If the element doesn't exist, the method will return -1. Therefore, we need to first check if the return value is equal to -1. So if our index variable equals -1, we're gonna return not found response. Return not found. However, if the index isn't equal to -1, the element exists and the code should continue. And at this point, we can update the value of the item associated with the given ID. We can do it by assigning the update item to the specified index of our books list. Books index updated item and we return OK. As expected, the fourth endpoint has appeared associated with the put method. This endpoint calls the update item action, which is used to update an item in our list. First, let's check our list by calling the get method. So get, try it out and execute. As we can see, currently there are 3 items in our list. Now let's assume that we want to update the title of the 3rd book associated with the ID equal to 3. So we go to the put endpoint. Try it out. We enter the ID of an item we want to update, in this case 3. Title 3 updated. Since put verb concerns all the properties in our item, we also have to change the ID property to 3. Let's execute our endpoint. After executing the endpoint, we get a 200 status code indicating success. Now let's execute the get endpoint again and see if the list is updated. Let's turn back to get endpoint and let's execute it. Execute. As we can see, the 3rd item has been updated. Its title has been changed to title 3 updated. In this chapter, we will discuss controllers and their actions. We'll cover what controller is, what its actions or endpoints are, how to create an example controller, define actions, and analyze how they work. But first, let's take a look at the architecture of web application. Each web application consists of 2 parts, its front-end side and back-end side. The front-end sends HTTP requests to the back-end. Back-end processes them and returns back the response, the HTTP response. The back-end returns so-called status codes, which indicate the result of the operation. The return status codes can be like OK, created, but request, not found, and the other ones. The data returned from the backend are carried within the response. As we've mentioned, the frontend sends HTTP requests to the backend. Each HTTP request is associated with so-called HTTP verb like get, put, post, delete, patch, and the others. Sometimes the HTTP request may have its parameters. These parameters supply HTTP request with additional information. In further lecture, we're gonna create from scratch our new controller. It will be called Books Controller, and it's gonna contain a couple of endpoints or actions. In this lecture, we're gonna create only the headers of these endpoints with some very simple logic. We're not gonna concentrate on this logic, we're rather gonna concentrate on the headers, on the endpoints, on routes, on parameters, and so on. So let's get started. Let's switch to Visual Studio and let's go to Controllers folder. Currently we've got one controller here, which is called Books Controller. Let's display its contents. As we've already mentioned, we're gonna create the contents of this class from scratch. So the first thing that we want to do is to delete its current contents. Okay, now we've got it done. We can close the Solution Explorer window to have a wider view. Okay, let's take a look at the structure of our controller class. It's a public class named Books Controller, and this class inherits from Controller Base. Controller Base is a special class that provides the functionality required for Web API controllers. Above the class, we can see two attributes. The first is API Controller, which indicates that this is a Web API controller, and the second is Route attribute. This attribute specifies the path leading to the controller's endpoints. We're gonna make a little change here. We're gonna prefix it with API phrase. Okay. This path represents the portion of the URL that follows the IP address or domain name and optional port number. It's a string that starts with the phrase API followed by a slash, and inside square brackets there is a placeholder for the word controller. This universal notation indicates that the controller's name should be placed here, which is in our case books. Now let's create the first action for our controller. An action is a public method that creates an endpoint. An endpoint can be seen as the entry point to the controller. Endpoints and their actions are identified by the path leading to them and the HTTP verb. Let's declare the first action for our controller. The action is a public method, so we're gonna use the public keyword. So, public. We want our action to return an action result type. The action result is what a controller action returns in response to a browser's request. So, action result. Next, we need to provide the name of our action. Let's call it get. Our action is gonna take no parameters. We're gonna implement the body of our first action and also the other actions with a very simple functionality. We're just gonna return HTTP OK status code to indicate a successful operation. So, curly brackets and return OK. And that's it. Now we're not gonna implement any more complicated logic of our endpoints. We just will be returning OK. Our action should respond to the HTTP GET verb, so we're gonna add the corresponding attribute HTTP GET above the action declaration. So HTTP GET. So our action is gonna respond to GET requests. Let's run our application and let's check how it works. So, go. As we can see, our Books controller has one endpoint. This endpoint responds to the GET verb, as indicated by the HTTP GET attribute. And it also has a path, which is /API/books. The path to the endpoint is constructed from two parts. The first part is the controller's path, which is in our case API books. The placeholder controller can be seen here replaced with our controller's name, which is books. The second path does not exist yet, but what if you wanted to extend it to include a specific endpoint path? Let's explore this with an example. We need to modify the HTTP GET attribute by adding a new path argument that will route us to our GET action. Specifically, we're gonna add the path getAll. So, getAll. Now, our endpoint's path consists of two parts. First, the controller's root path, followed by another slash and the phrase getAll, which is the argument provided in the HTTP GET attribute. Let's check how it works. As expected, we can see that the path leading to our GET endpoint is now constructed from two parts: API/books from the controller's route and getAll from the actions route. These two parts are separated by slash. You might wonder whether each HTTP verb, for example get, need to be associated with only one endpoint. The answer is no. One HTTP verb can be associated with multiple endpoints. Let's create another action to illustrate this. We're gonna do it in next lecture. In this lecture, we're gonna create getItem endpoint or action. This action will also be public and will also return an action result type. So public action result and the name of action getItem. It's gonna be a parameterless action and it's also gonna return OK status code. And return as I've already mentioned, we're not gonna create some deeper logic and implement it inside our actions. Right now we are going to concentrate only on the endpoints declarations and parameters. We're gonna talk about more advanced logic in endpoints, in actions, in following sections. So now we have two actions, one named getAll and the next one named getItem. We want the getItem action to respond to the getVerb too. First, we need to differentiate our action getItem from the getAll action. To achieve this, it must be accessible through a different path. Let's name this new path getItem. So, HTTP get, and the path get item. Now we have two endpoints, both using the HTTP GET attribute, but with different paths, get all and get item. Of course, both paths are prefixed by the controller's root path, which is API/books. Let's start our application. So we can see that the books controller has two endpoints, one with the path API/books/getAll, and the other one with API/books/getItem. The first endpoint retrieves a list of all books, so no parameters are required. The second endpoint, however, retrieves a specific book, so we need to specify which one. There are three ways to pass parameters from the frontend to the backend: from route, from query, and from body. For now, we want to focus on the from route method, which involves extracting parameters from the path. For our action, we're gonna use the first attitude, so taking parameter from route. In the path leading to our endpoint, specifically in the section related to the action, we add a placeholder for a parameter. This parameter is retrieved directly from the path, identified by the curly braces and the parameter name inside them. In the shown case, parameter name is ID. To break it down, the full path to our action starts with the root controller attribute, API books, followed by the phrase identifying the endpoint. In the picture we can see delete item phrase, however, for our action it will be get item, this part of rows. Our path incorporates a placeholder for a parameter to be passed to the action. So we've defined an integer parameter named ID for this action. To specify that the parameter should be retrieved from the path, we're gonna use fromRoute attribute. So let's turn back to Visual Studio. So we're gonna introduce the action parameter here. So fromRoute, the type is integer, and the name is ID. To see this in action, we're gonna set a breakpoint in the method and run the application. So let's put the breakpoint here. This is gonna allow us to observe how the parameter is passed to the action. But we have to do one more thing. We have to enter the placeholder with the parameter name in our route. We go to HTTP GET attribute. We put slash here and in curly braces the name of the parameter, ID. Start our application to check how it works. The path to our endpoint is composed of two parts. The first part, API books, is defined by the controller's route attribute. After slash comes the second part, get item, followed by another slash and the ID enclosed in curly braces. This section is defined within the endpoint itself, where the placeholder ID is used to pass the ID parameter value to the backend. Let's execute our endpoint. So, try it out. And here we have to enter the parameter value. Let's say 2. And execute. We're stopped by our checkpoint. Let's check what is the value of ID parameter. It's 2, as expected. So everything works fine. So at this moment we have two endpoints, getAll endpoint and the getItem endpoint. The first one returns a list of books, is supposed to return a list of books. As I have mentioned, we haven't introduced more complex logic inside our actions. And the second returns, or should be returning, single selected item from the list. In this lecture, we're gonna create a new action called delete item. It's gonna be public method that returns an action result type. So public action result. We of course gonna name it delete item. As a parameter, it should accept the ID of the item we want to delete. So integer ID. Since we want this parameter to be retrieved from the root, we need to use the from root attribute. So from root. So now we have the header of our action. Now it's time to fill its body. Curly braces. As in previous cases, we simply write return OK here, because right now we are not dealing with the functional logic of our endpoints. So return OK. That's it. Correct. Just like in the previous case, our ID parameter is retrieved from root, which is why we've used the from root attribute. Now to associate our action with the HTTP delete verb, we need to add an attribute to the entire action. For this, we're gonna use HTTP delete attribute, which ensures that the endpoint responds to delete requests. So HTTP delete. Now about the root. We define it as follows. It starts with the phrase delete item followed by slash. So delete item slash. After the slash in the placeholder, the ID of the item to be deleted is gonna be passed. So curly braces ID. This structure will allow us to specify which item to delete by pointing its ID. Just like in the previous case, we want to set a breakpoint at the entry point of our action and run application to observe its behavior. So let's put the breakpoint here. In our controller, a third endpoint associated with the delete verb has appeared, highlighted in red. We can observe that the path to this endpoint consists of two parts. The first part, API books, comes from the root attribute of our controller, whereas the second part comes from the attribute assigned to our delete item action. It contains delete item followed by slash and a placeholder for the ID, the location where the parameter value will be passed. Let's execute our endpoint. Try it out. As we can see, our endpoint requires to provide ID. Let's assume that we want to delete the item with ID equal to 2. Execute. After executing the action, we hit the breakpoint set in the delete item action. Now let's enter the action and confirm that the ID parameter passed through the root indeed has the value of 2. Yes, as we can see, it has a value of 2. Once we have verified this, we can complete the execution by clicking continue, and we can see the action has finished successfully, returning a 200 status code, which means OK. Here we got it. Thus, we have created the third endpoint in our books controller. Now our controller has 3 endpoints. The first, getAll, retrieving a list of all books. The second, getItem, giving a specific book for the front end. And the third, deleteItem, deleting a specific item from the list. Now it's time to create the fourth endpoint, which will add items to the list. And we're gonna deal with it in our next lecture. In this lecture, we're gonna create another action for our controller. It will be add item action. This action requires a parameter which contains the contents of a new item to be added to the list. Specifically, it has to be an object of type book, since the list items are book objects. And it will be named book. Or maybe better, new book. However, we don't have this book class yet, so let's create it. We're gonna do it here. So, public class, book, it's gonna contain two properties, public integer ID, and public string title. Okay, now we can use this class. Let's create add item action. The attribute for the action. We're gonna assign it to post HTTP verb. So HTTP post. Now the root. Add item. Okay. And now the declaration of our method. It's going to be public method. It's going to return action result. And we're going to name it add item. Our action is going to take one parameter. It will be the new book to be created. So, book. This parameter will be of type book. And we're gonna name it new book. And we're gonna take this parameter from the body of our HTTP request. So, from body. As we have already mentioned, each HTTP request has its body. The body is the area where the parameter values can be placed. So we're gonna do it like that. Here we got our endpoint, add item, and in the request body we're gonna set the values of our parameters. That's why we've assigned our parameter, our action parameter, book, new book, with the from body attribute. Our add item endpoint will return a status code to indicate the result of the operation. This time, we don't need to use the status code OK, but create it instead of this, which code is 201. The status code is returned when a new object is successfully created within the backend data structures. So curly braces and return created. Okay, let's put the breakpoint here and let's start our application. As we can see, the fourth endpoint has appeared in our controller, and it's associated with the HTTP post verb. The path to it consists of two parts: API books, which comes from the root attribute of the controller, and add item, the second part of the path, coming from the HTTP post attribute of our endpoint. See that we don't need an ID attribute here. So let's execute our endpoint. Try it out. In Swagger there is a request body area, which is an editable area used to enter the parameter values. So let's put, for example, 1 in ID and title 1 in title property. And now execute. We are stopped at the breakpoint and the entry to the endpoint. Let's check what's happening here. Let's check what the value of new book parameter is. New book. As we can see, we have ID equal to 1 and title equal to title 1. So the parameter values have been provided from body of our HTTP request to our endpoint. And everything works as expected. We can continue to run our application. We go back to Swagger and we can see that we've received 204 response, which represents created status code. So putting it all together, now we have 4 endpoints in our controller. GetAll for retrieving all items to the front end, getItem for retrieving a specific item, deleteItem for deleting a specific item, and addItem to add a new one. In this lecture we will create the last endpoint of our controller, the endpoint for updating the items in the list. We're gonna call it updateItem, and we're gonna create a special action for it. The action should of course return an action result type. Our endpoint will be responding to put verb, HTTP put verb. So we're gonna annotate our method, our action method, with the HTTP put attribute. So HTTP put, and the route to our endpoint, update item. Our endpoint will need 2 parameters: the ID of an item to be updated and new item value. We're gonna take the first parameter, ID, from route. So here in the route we're gonna put placeholder with the name of a variable ID. Now let's create a declaration of our method. It's gonna be a public method, so public. It's gonna return action result. It's gonna be named updateItem. And it's gonna take 2 parameters. The first one will be the ID of an item to be updated. So integer ID. This parameter we're gonna take from route, from this place, ID. So attribute from route. We've got the first parameter. Now the second one. We're gonna provide to our endpoint the new values for the updated item. So book updated item, and we're gonna take this parameter from the body of the HTTP request. So we need to put here from body attribute, from body. Okay, now the time for the body of our action, curly braces. We're just gonna return OK status code. OK. Let's put the breakpoint here and let's start our application. Go. The fifth endpoint appeared in our box controller. It corresponds to the put requests. The route to it consists of two paths. The first part of the path, API books, comes from our controller, and update item and ID in placeholder comes from the action. Let's try to execute our endpoint. Try it out. We need to provide two parameters here. The first parameter is the ID of an item to be updated. So let's say sum is gonna be 1. And the next one parameter, the parameter that is taken from the request body, is here. We have to provide here the new values of the updated item. So let's put it maybe 1 and title updated. Okay, let's execute it. We are stopped at the endpoint. Let's check the parameters. First, the ID. Let's check it. It's okay. The value of this parameter is 1. It corresponds to what we've entered in our endpoint in Swagger. Let's check the other one. Updated item, ID1 title equals to title updated. So everything works as expected. We can continue execution of our program. And as we can see, we've here got the response status OK. So everything works fine. In this lecture, we're gonna deal with the third method of taking parameters from HTTP request, taking them from query. From query refers to retrieving parameters from the query string of the HTTP request, which comes after the root path. When we use this approach in our endpoint, it means we are fetching data from the query string. From here. The query string comes after the root URL and contains parameters in the format key-value pairs. Here we've got the key title, and here comes the value of this key. So let's create another public action which returns action result, and let's call it getItemByTitle. Public action result and the name of our action getItemByTitle. Our endpoint is gonna have one parameter, a string containing the title. So string title, and we're gonna take this parameter from query. From query. As in previous cases, our endpoint is gonna just return OK response status. Return OK. Our endpoint is going to respond to HTTP GET verb. So HTTP GET, and its path gonna be getItemByTitle. So getItemByTitle. Okay. Let's locate the breakpoint at the entry point of our newly created endpoint. And let's run our application. Go. We've added a new endpoint in our books controller. After the phrase API books, we now have getItemByTitle, which is associated with the HTTP verb, getVerb. This endpoint retrieves a single parameter, the title of a book, from the query string, the part of the URL that comes after the root path. Okay, let's execute this endpoint. Try it out. We're gonna enter the title of a searched book here. Let's say title 1. And we press execute. We'll stop at the endpoint and the entry of our action. Let's check the value of the title parameter. As we can see, its value is title 1, just the value we've entered in Swagger. We'll press continue. Our endpoint has returned 200 code, which means OK. Let's take a look at the request URL. What have we got here? We've got here a route to our endpoint. This is the address, port number, API books, the part of a route that comes from controller, and getItemByTitle, the part of a route that comes from the endpoint. And here, after the question mark, we've got our parameter, title, and its value title 1. So as we can see, our parameter has been passed in the URL to our endpoint. In this way, we have demonstrated the third method of passing parameters through the query string. The query is the part of a request URL that comes after the root path, starting with the special character question mark. Okay, let's make a quick summary of endpoints and their parameters issues. Each endpoint is defined by the HTTP verb, like get, delete, put, post, and the others, and the path, which includes the controller and the endpoint segments. While not all endpoints require parameters, as demonstrated by our getAllEndpoint, parameters can be passed in 3 ways. From root, where they are extracted from the path of the URL, from body, where they are passed in the body of the HTTP request, and from query, where they are retrieved from the query string in the URL after the root.
Hi, my name is Albert Sadowski. I've been working in IT for over 20 years. I'm a full-stack developer working in .NET, Angular, and Azure. I've worked on projects for companies in the United States, United Kingdom, and Europe. I'm also a university coding teacher. I've taught students at 4 universities. At this one, at this one, at this one, and at this one.